Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to start off by wishing you a warm welcome to 3 days of this conference. I'm the first person to start the conference, and my name is Amit Alok, and I work for a scale-up called Chief DX, which is based in Singapore. We're an award-winning company that specializes in data science and AI. Now, at this point, I'm usually asked, what's a scale-up, Amit? So let me start by asking one question. Is anybody here from Singapore? No? Okay. So in Singapore, a scale-up is when the Ministry of Manpower starts bombarding you with surveys that are meant for multinationals. And you know at that point, you've graduated from a startup. So that's the definition where I come from. So as the first keynote, I'm going to set the scene for the 3 days. I'm going to talk to you about cloud and AI. We have a number of eminent speakers throughout the 3 days, and they're going to be talking about specialities within AI. So not to steal the thunder from them, I'm just going to talk to you in general terms of our experience as a startup in the space. So as you can see, we have a number of areas that we'll be looking at. My own experience in these areas is working with data. So 20 years of experience working for these multinationals, and it's not a surprise that I ended up in data science eventually as the technology moved on. But one of the things that has been quite standard has been this. I don't know if you've come across the statement of a VUCA world: volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. It's what we call business as normal in our part of the world. And it's actually the space that we want to be in, because enabling technologies allows us to manage in that space. And I'm going to share with you how we did that ourselves. Let's start with the AI cloud. From our experience, a number of clients over the pandemic have been implementing cloud as an AI solutions as a SaaS option, both for internal use and external use. And the key advantage of that has been that it democratizes AI, which means that everybody, no matter what budget, what size, is able to use cloud and AI together. And we wouldn't be in a position where we were a few years ago as a startup if it wasn't for these technological changes. It provides a level playing field, and it drives AI transformation. Now, we'll also notice that some initiatives that key enterprises are doubling down on during the pandemic, and the ability to be able to invest in these technologies because of their agility, because of their scalability, has coined the term elastic cloud. Now, there's a few who that use AWS. You'll see that on your bill. EC, elastic cloud, that's what you got to pay for every month. But this, along with big data and IoT, is driving digital transformation. These are the key technology vectors. If you have a look at what happens during the pandemic, there was a key focus on data. And there was a significant change in buyer behavior. Right? We all know because we went online because we were in lockdowns. Right? We were all trying to get orders in for supermarkets, and initially they all got jammed, and there was a shortage of stock. And so we understood that. That's quite logical. What happened subsequently was a focus on the HR issues, which was about looking at the importance of staff retention. Yeah, the debate still continues on what is known as the Great Resignation. Are we going to require different priorities in our life to drive what we do in our jobs? So there's a few things that I would say made a difference. Supply chain shocks, not just about getting things to you in the country, but also the last mile, logistics. A number of logistic apps came up for delivery to your home, and they suffered at the beginning because they weren't ready for the sheer volume that came about. So as we looked at these things that were changing, enterprises were doubling down in two areas. They were either looking at things and saying, okay, we need to get a competitive advantage, let's take advantage of the pandemic. And they chose one of two paths, or possibly both. One was at a strategy level, and this was about trying to align your strategic objectives and your priorities and your behavior within the organization. And the other thing was, the other path was looking at a product, service, or operational level. And in our experience, when you look at a operational product or service level strategy, a lot of the enterprises were looking at ROI and stacking their projects according to ROI. Now, we think that's a mistake. We think they should have been looking at stacking them according to advantage. And we still maintain that. There are few parameters that are different. ROI is a number, but actually you want to look at advantage. So that was one of our learnings from working with clients in that space. So we were fortunate enough to start some new projects, and I'm going to take one as a case study and take you through that. I hope you can read the top level. So it's strategic level decision making for a diversified group. So we started out, we were actually shortlisted at the bottom right-hand corner, communities, which was actually real estate. And we were shortlisted for crowd analytics for a new mall. What is the crowd going to be like? Where would you place which type of stores? What's the ratio of actual stores versus experiential offerings, etc.? That's what we were shortlisted for. And it became quite apparent during the data strategy phase that the group had a lot more information in all their other areas. And to be honest, they weren't making use of it. And so when we sort of went through the process of a data strategy as to where we're going to get, for example, demographics, the group had a lot of information from the cinemas, from the esports, from the hospitality, from supermarkets. So the project got elevated to group level. Decision-making was more strategic. And of course, a lot more parties got involved in that. So we went from the CEO of a particular business unit sponsoring the project to the group CEO and the board managing it. And that level, decision-making takes a different, I'd say, color in that sense, because you are now looking at trying to get KPIs for a diversified group, and you need a lot more data and a lot more work. One of the areas that we'll talk about is predictive analytics. So this is the sort of situation whereby you take, in AI terms, you take 10 weeks of sort of primary data and try and predict the next 2 weeks. That could be for synchronized inventory, it could be for crowds, it could be to get over the issues that your e-commerce people are having with logistics. It can apply across the board. And you want to be able to align your key objectives with the behaviors that you expect from your staff and the groups and the group companies. You also want to be able to get an indicator of future buying behavior. So to understand that, it's like took a couple of case studies. These are not ours, but this is a tech firm that created a machine learning algorithm, a good one actually, that can identify employees that were at risk of leaving. Now, remember that during this time, we're going through all this debate about, should we be staying on this sort of hybrid working model going into the future, and people were concerned. This algorithm actually helped them identify, those that might be considering a move and what to talk to them about in order to dissuade them. So that the managers, the immediate supervisors, will get some recommendations. Another one was a healthcare group that analyzed marketing spend using a predictive KPI. And this was an interesting case for us because there's a school of thought, and I think it's been driven by MIT research, is that KPIs should be distilled from the data rather than being set and being measured. And there's a debate going on about that, but I think they're actually a school of thought that's winning is the fact that you need to distill those out of the data. And there are other sets of learnings that we can share. If you want to be able to make the most of predictive analytics at a strategic level, you want to be able to provide access to your whole organization about your AI strategy, about the tools that you're going to use. And there should be no exceptions to that. Secondly, data specialists need to be involved at an early stage. Now, I'm not just saying that because we're data specialists, but really the first thing you have to do with an AI project is look at data. And if you're going to have any problems, they need to surface at that point. So that's actually quite important. And the third is probably the most significant, and we miss it all the time, is the impact of the change that your staff are going to go through. Right? It could be a huge cultural change. It could be cultural changes plus the changes due to your processes that are being changed, due to automation, due to other changes, the way they work. And it also provides a bonding for everyone to come together. But this is an area that needs to be acknowledged from the leadership, needs to be budgeted for, and needs to be monitored. Now, we're currently working on a global project for a media and entertainment company where we're just going through this whole change. And the CEO has decided that change management will run prior to the data strategy, right? So, which is the right way to do things. Okay, to say there were challenges during the pandemic and post-pandemic is an understatement. But we're going to look at it from two perspectives, industry perspective as well as a more pragmatic approach at a project level. So for the AI industry, there's only really two words that make sense here: responsible AI. Now, AI differs from any other technology in that it's the only one that learns and changes the outcomes automatically. And humans try and work that out because it happens at such speed. And it's also capable of making grave errors faster than a human. Despite this, it is providing huge benefits to companies if you follow a simple guiding principles. Engage the whole company in the AI strategy, including an organizational review for what you want to be. Educate and train all employees, so AI is used so that they understand how it will impact them and help them do their jobs better. And regularly implement audits on the AI, particularly during deployment, with a particular attention to bias in the algorithms. Now, those of you starting out early, I'd recommend the World Economic Forum Toolkit for Boards as a starting point. They help people just get started at that level. But establishing trust between customers, employees, and other stakeholders is critical. So we have to look at transparency, accountability, fairness, privacy, and security. Now, AI algorithms can be black boxes. So one of the first things to ask the people you're working with or writing the algorithms, your own internal teams, or whether it's a vendor, how transparent is this? Do you know when it makes a decision and why it makes it? You have to ask those questions. And then if something goes wrong, who is accountable? Right? You've got a PR disaster on your hands, as we've seen in the press before. People have made grave mistakes, even the big tech guys, right? And they've had to come out. Who is accountable? So we need to work on that. Make sure there's fairness and the bias in the algorithm is removed. Sometimes the bias is there because of the developers. It may not be your company doing it, but there is bias, and you need to actively look into that. And of course, there's regulations now, but certainly in terms of following the guidelines on privacy and security. GDPR, PDP in Singapore, every country level, you have private data issues that need to be managed. So this is a tall order for the industry, but it's addressing it. And we expect further regulations to help ease that going forward. So if you look at it from a project perspective, there's no AI project without data. And we have three areas here where it's very important. What's the quality of data you can expect? So if you run a data strategy, which you should right at the beginning, you want to look at the quality of the data. How scarce is it? Will the client have to go to a commercial organization and pay for the data? Or is it hidden in the various verticals that it has, like we found out in one of our projects? Will you be able to get that? And data annotation. Data has to be labeled. For all the automation and the automatic learning of AI algorithms, we start with a very manually intensive process called data annotation. Now, usually we have data wrangling teams that do that, and it's the Wild West when you start out. I mean, I don't know what wrangling means to you, but I think of, wrangling being about getting cattle and, throwing hoops and trying to do that in the Wild West. And basically that's what it is right at the beginning, till you start making some sense of it. But it's important that this is acknowledged and budgeted for. Now, computing power is a topic that's come up to the fore, especially with cloud GPUs, with green data centers coming foremost, your ESG strategy coming into being. So you work in a very large project in teams, and everyone forgot to ask the question, well, how many data centers are we going to need? And are our investors going to be okay with that? So these questions need to be asked. And how much power are we using? We don't have enough talent in the space to fulfill all our needs. So they're scarce. We need to hold on to them. They need to be trained well, and they need to have the right competencies. So you need your HR programs. And that's why I initially said about retention, right? There's a transformation that needs to happen for the majority of the staff, but the actual skill levels in the specific fields or the new technology like AI, like cloud, need to be there. And of course, that comes down to costs. And cost not just in terms of money, but in terms of management time, in terms of timelines. There's a resource cost to everything. Right? So those have to be looked at in great detail. And I'm talking from a perspective of a vendor of AI solutions. Even we have to work with the client on these issues together. And data governance. So data governance, if you're doing an AI project for the first time and you are looking at, all the things that you can capture for the first time, there are regulations about what you can hold for individuals. And if you haven't got a compliance and a governance ready by the time the project goes live, well, you won't be allowed to go live, basically. So there's a huge area. I mean, I could talk for hours on data governance, but yeah, I'll leave you with that thought. So we're going to take you through some case studies now in our experience of some of the projects. So the good news is some companies are making serious money. Now, that's not my wording. That's the wording from a survey that was done in 22. If you look at the bottom of the page, New Vantage Partners survey, right? Over the last few years, companies have been experimenting with AI. So unless you deploy, you don't get an ROI. So there were costs. So they weren't making any money on that. There were no returns. But now they've gone through the experimentation phase and moved on to deployment. And there's some serious ROIs. So I would ask you to read that survey. So that's the good news. Of course, if you don't deploy, you can't take advantage of it. But according to the surveys, the ROI has doubled in the last 3 years. And if you're in Singapore like we are, and you're looking at it globally, we continue to see AI-powered projects in e-commerce, retail, logistics, delivery, financial services. We ourselves had to pivot during the pandemic to media and entertainment, because that was getting a lot of investments, and healthcare. And the idea is that even though the projects may be multi-year, and most of our projects are, that you work with the client on all the things that I've just spoken about right at the beginning of it, even though it means delaying the timelines and the start dates. But we have to work with them. One area we had to work with is financial services with chatbots. Chatbots were nothing new, but they were basic. I mean, the chances are you type in something, the chatbot says, I'll transfer you to a live agent. It can't handle it right at the beginning. So what we've seen, we work with one client, and where the handover to the live agent went down from 70% to 30%, which means that a significant amount of problems were resolved by an AI-based chatbot. And they were getting smarter as the AI algorithms were getting better. And that means the customer experience was up, plus the fact that you were forced to use chatbots because we were in no contact timelines, that made the customer experience even better. In financial services, the chatbots were pretty decent to start with. But the acceptance of chatbots for investment advice was actually quite staggering. It was a huge amount of resistance pre-pandemic, and now you have a lot of startups starting up, SME lending and the others, and people are accepting that. So that's been a huge change. Robo-advisors that were solely the province of private banking have now come to the mass market. Okay, so this is influencer management. Now, if you've been monitoring influencers, they rose significantly during the pandemic, particularly in China, where the top influencers were earning hundreds of millions of dollars in commissions. I mean, that's staggering. That's just commissions. You can imagine the volumes that we're going through. So we developed an influencer management system. This is actually for a Hollywood studio. And you're able to identify influencers based on selected criteria like language, the vertical, the demographics, and even the fashion look. So we actually go and analyze the video and the photographs. And then use a matching engine to allow for collaboration between the sponsor, the company, and the influencers. And that can lead to managing campaigns, particularly in media and entertainment and esports, which is what we're working in now. But it can be configured for any other vertical, but it's fully AI powered. This is something we did for an ASEAN tourism board. Now, as we exit the pandemic, borders reopen. The question in everybody's mind is, how do we get tourism back? You know, it's taken a back seat. Airlines are struggling. So we did a specialist strategy for an ASEAN country, where we looked at what's available in the country in terms of bricks and mortar, experiential spaces, and what combination would work for the country. Once we have the answers from that, we started addressing it for between residents and tourists. So the ideal situation is that a tourist lands, you know, they get their free SIM card or they get their free discount vouchers, they opt in, and then you're able to know, based on data, what exactly would interest them. And you offer them those sort of offers in terms of discounts, in stores, online, the whole omni-channel thing. And so you need a recommender system for that. So we implemented one of those. But the interesting thing was that an app was offered to salespeople. So there's a chance, and I'm not saying that they'll know exactly who's walked in. That can happen with facial recognition, but we're not allowed to use those, right? But at least once you get a conversation going with a customer, you have some idea. The salesman has some idea on what those people would like. And it makes for a more meaningful conversation. Now, healthcare. Honestly, we didn't know where to start with this. It's a huge area. What we've identified are some areas that are non-clinical. Now, if you look at clinical healthcare work in AI, it's like a 5-year plan, right? So you have to build a lot of trust with the clinicians. And remember, we're in the middle of a pandemic. Those guys are busy. So the chances are you won't get their time. So what we did was to look at clinical, non-clinical areas. And we started with non-clinical, a location-based doctor booking app that connects users with the nearest GPs. That's what people wanted to know. And the last bit there was the video consultation, right? Because they were in lockdown in most places around the world. So that was a priority call. Not a lot of AI in there, but it does build trust. It does get you data sets to prepare for the AI. And the next phase after this is primary analysis and diagnosis of symptoms. But for that, you need a huge amount of data sets, right? We're hoping to move, we've got 1,200 GPs, probably going to 18,000 and 5,000 labs and pharmacies. And that needs to be done because we need the data sets for the next phase. And the next phase for a hospital or hospital group would look like this. So note the similarity between the strategic decision-making slide and this. This is exactly what it is. So you've got pharmacy, synchronized inventory, you don't run out during a pandemic. Space, so this is monitoring all the space in the hospitals, the beds within a room and the rooms. So there's a lot of IoT work that goes on here. Staff wearing badges, you know where they are. DME. So DMEs are interesting. They're durable medical equipment. So these are the big machines that are not easy to move around. But if you've got a stroke patient coming in or someone who needs a ventilator, you need to know that you've got those in hand for when they come in. So it's important that you look at DME and non-DME. Non-DME is obviously, durable medical equipment, which, bandages and the likes. And so it's important that we do that. So this is an IoT-based, a lot of sensors, go into a cloud data lake, transform using AI, and not only does it save lives because of the time it saves before everything is ready, but also it saves the hospital a fair amount of money being able to predict what their requirements are going to be. And finally, this is for actually 2 studios. This happens to be for both a Hollywood and a Bollywood studio. So this is all about video analytics, computer vision, and personalization platform for an OTT app. You want to be able to people to pick up on the projects, on the offerings, a bit like Netflix, to give you a chance. But the other end was the strategic decision making to digitally transform the companies to digital organizations. It was important to give both of these, and I can't talk to you too much about the content. It's a live project, and they're a little sensitive about the algorithms. But the idea is that we actually analyze hundreds, thousands of movies and predict content that will be used for the next one, and which actors you might want to have. Can you substitute one for another? And what would that do to the ratings? Right? So that's happening live. And so that's a very interesting project. It's live sessions, so that's ongoing right now. So that's all I have for you today. Please enjoy the rest of the sessions, and thank you for your time.